Hello and welcome to this lecture on the Professional Ethics in Computing module. Today I'm going to talk about responsible research and innovation, sometimes also just called responsible innovation, hence the parentheses, responsible AI, and data ethics. These are topics that you are quite likely to require when writing your report because they cut across various different applications and types of technologies, and they look at ways in which you can do this responsibly. So I'll start by introducing the concept of responsible research and innovation, sometimes referred to as RRI, which is a concept that's been around for a bit more than a decade, and it's typically understood as a way to ensure that the research you do is done in ways that are consistent with the needs, requirements, and preferences of society and stakeholders. What I'm going to show you here, or what I'm showing you here, is a definition that comes from the European Union, from a project that was called RRI Tools, where they try to look at other perspectives on responsible innovation. And what it says here is that RRI is a way to do research that takes a long-term perspective on the type of world in which we want to live. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that I think it demonstrates the ambition of responsible innovation. So it's not just about ticking boxes, about complying, about making sure that your professional body is happy with you, about ensuring that you don't break the law. All of these are important aspects, but it is a lot bigger than that. It looks at the question of how we can use technology in a way that will shape a world that we want to live in. Now, that's a big ask, that's a very ambitious statement, and it will be very difficult to find out what such a world would look like. So what is the world that we would all agree on? Notwithstanding these difficulties, I think it's an important pointer in the direction of responsible innovation as something that wants to make the world a better place and uses technology to achieve that. And I think that really is at the heart of responsible innovation. Here's another definition or characteristic of responsible innovation from the same project, which goes from this large ambition that I've shown you in the previous slide to a more functional set of benefits that responsible innovation can generate. So by doing responsible research, by implementing principles and practices of responsible innovation into your project, you can see here there is an expectation that this will strengthen the research, that it will improve your innovation projects, that it will make them open, transparent, and diverse, inclusive, and adaptive to change. So all of this is this implies that your research will actually become better. Now, why do you need to worry about research? Why do you, as a COMP3020 student, need to be concerned with these questions? Well, I think it is very likely that as part of your group project, you will find that there are areas that you don't understand fully, that there are questions that would require further research. I suspect, you'll see, that many of your action plans, your steps forward after the submission of the proposal or of the report will include references to research. So that's one of the things that you are, I think, quite likely to recommend to your senior management, that your company needs to do further research in certain areas. If that's the case, then it's not just about collecting data and making sense of them. It is also about doing this in a way that is acceptable, desirable, promotes the social good. And that's what responsible innovation is about. Now, it's about thinking about the context of the research, how it will lead to a better world, and how you can do this also in acceptable ways during the research. Here is a definition from the European Union, which for a while was very dominant in this concept of responsible research and innovation. And I'll just stick with the first sentence here, which you see, responsible research and innovation is an ongoing process of aligning research and innovation to the values, needs, and expectations of society. So it's this idea that we bring together society, what the world needs, and the research community, and make sure that the research community doesn't just ask interesting questions, but ask them in a way that reflects the values of society. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's been written about responsible research and innovation, and I'll just touch on some of the key points. An important bit here is the idea of anticipation. So you need to think about what are the consequences of your research and how you can do your research in ways that lead to benefit, that maximize benefits, while at the same time minimize and mitigate risks and avoid harms. You can see the Venn diagram in the middle there. So responsible innovation aims at acceptability, desirability, and sustainability. It is an iterative process, so it goes in circles. You learn from what you've done, you look at what you've done, you implement changes accordingly. It helps you to reflect, to think about what you're doing, and it evolves. It's not a static set of recipes. Now, one research funder that has adopted this idea of responsible innovation is the EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, which is one of the big national funding councils and is now part of UKRI, which is UK Research and Innovation. UKRI, as a general rule, has also adopted this now. So what EPSRC suggested, and this goes back to 2010 or 2011, is that responsible innovation can be reflected through what they call the AREA framework. And AREA stands for anticipate, reflect, engage, and act, which means that if you want to do your research responsibly, you need to anticipate, you need to think about what the consequences may be. You need to reflect on what you're doing, how you're doing it, what's the purpose, what's the motivation, why am I doing this? You need to engage, so you need to talk to stakeholders, so the people who are affected. These may be your users, but they may also be non-users. There may be communities that are in some way involved in your research. And you need to engage them in an open and fair dialogue to make sure that you take their positions on board. And then finally, you have to do something on the basis of these insights. So it's not good enough to just think about the consequences and engage with the stakeholders. You then have to change your research accordingly. So that is the EPSRC interpretation, which in a project called the Framework for Responsible Innovation in ICT, and later Orbit, the Observatory for Responsible Innovation in ICT, where we try to develop this and make it a bit more applicable. So we supplemented the AREA framework with the 4 Ps. So we suggested that if you want to do things responsibly, you need to think about the process. So what is it that you do as part of the research? How do you collect data? How do you interact with people? You also need to think about the product. What's the outcome? So if this is successful, if you do research in a way that leads to the outcomes that you want, what comes out of this, and what are the implications of the product of your research? You need to reflect on the purpose. Why am I doing the research? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? And finally, you need to think about the people who are involved in whichever way in the research. So we used the AREA framework and the 4 Ps to create this matrix here, where we thought about how the 4 Ps map to the different parts of the AREA framework. And then for each of the intersections, we try to come up with some what we call scaffolding questions. So these are questions that will help you to think through what you are doing, how you're doing it, what parts of the research you need to think about. So this is a tool that I find quite useful, and that you can use to reflect on your research. So this is something that you could do for your report. Once you've come up with your action plan, you may want to run your action plan through these questions. So first one, now, is the planned research methodology acceptable? So what does that mean? So what data do you collect? Will people be happy with the data to be collected? What do you need to be put in place to safeguard your participants, and so on? So these are different questions. We have got a slightly more developed version of this, which you find in the on the URL that I show at the bottom here. So that's at the Orbit project. So this is the same as the previous slide. It's just got some indicative answers. So you've got the AREA framework on the left, you've got the 4 Ps at the top, and then you have your scaffolding questions and some suggested possible answers that are worth considering. So I'll show you what this looks like on the website now. So this is the Orbit website. Orbit stands for the Observatory for Responsible Innovation in ICT, which is now a company, a non-profit company spun out of the Orbit project, and it does lots of interesting things. And if you're interested in response innovation, you'll find lots of resources. The one thing I wanted to show you here is the Area 4P framework. So if you click on that, you see an explanation of the various points I've just mentioned. And then at the bottom here, you can download a PDF. And the PDF is the PDF that looks like this. So this is, to me, is a very good tool to try to get your head around what are the things that you might consider when you're doing a piece of research. We've also, in a subsequent project, looked at how does this play out in practice. And we've developed what we call an RI maturity model. You may have come across maturity models in different contexts. Maturity models, for example, exist in software and different areas of management. The point of this maturity model is to show that being responsible or not is not a 0-1 binary option. It's not like you're completely responsible or you're not responsible, but rather there are different levels and gradations of responsibility. And we've come up with a suggestion on how those could be represented. Now, I've tried to make the case to you that responsible innovation is a good thing, and I would want to see in your action plan some references to responsible innovation. How can you do your action responsibly if they include research? But I also need to be very clear that it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve all the problems in this world. So while anticipation is important, we don't know what the future holds. We will not be able to avoid all problems coming from research. There will be future ones that come. Key to a lot of the current debates are value conflicts. People disagree on what is more important. Is it freedom of speech? Is it safety? Value conflicts will not go away. We'll need to deal with them. Responsible innovation can help us understand them. It doesn't make them go away. Following responsible innovation principles also doesn't mean you're in the clear. You may still have issues, and you may still be required to take responsibility. So it's not a panacea. But what it does do, and why I think it's really worth doing, is that helps you to think about what you're doing in an intelligent way. So it stimulates conversations about responsible research and innovation. And it helps you to think about how you think about what you're doing. So that's what we call second order reflexivity. So not only do you do stuff and have an idea of why you do stuff, but you think about how you justify your own action. So the second order reflexivity is really important, and it's part of what you hopefully will have picked up to some extent in this module. We have tried to find further ways of making this more applicable and more usable. And one of the things that was developed here at the University of Nottingham is these responsible innovation prompt and practice cards. So it's really a way of getting the ideas that I've just presented and outlined into the hands of people who do research and innovation. So it's based on the exact same thing that I've just talked about, the area framework and the 4 Ps. And here you see a different way of representing this matrix, but this has now been turned into playing cards. And for each of these playing cards, you have the questions, the scaffolding questions, but you also have then possible examples and applications. If you're interested in this, here's a link to it, so you can download those cards. And here at the University of Nottingham, Elvira will have physical copies of the cards. So if you want to play around with this as part of your group project, have a chat with Elvira. I'm sure she'll be happy to give you a pack for you to just explore. That was responsible research and innovation. I'm now going to say a few words about some other aspects of responsibility that are likely to be relevant to you as computer professionals, but also in your report. So one of them is responsible AI, a term that's been bandied about quite widely at this point. What is responsible AI? Again, a big debate, something that we could spend a lot of time talking about. We at the University of Nottingham are heavily involved in this RAI, Responsible AI UK program of work, where Nottingham is one of the key partners, along with a few other universities, where we spend much time exploring how responsible AI can be implemented, how it can be conceptualized, and how it can be put into technical practice. So what is it? Well, on the one hand, there is this idea that responsible AI has to be in line with existing principles, codes, regulations, all the stuff that we've looked at here in our module, things like professional standards, things like the law, things like ethical principles. And then it also is AI that is developed using responsibility as a key component. And the ROI principles that I've talked about earlier, I think quite nicely align with responsible AI. So if you want to develop an AI tool, an AI system, then going back to the area 4P, to the cards, would be really helpful in making sure that this system is planned and implemented responsibly. And this has consequences for the AI. So hopefully it will mean that people will find it more trustworthy, it's more principled, it is something that people are happy to engage with because it improves the quality of their lives. Now, the last thing that I want to quickly talk about is this idea of data ethics. Data ethics is, I think, crucial to everything we do in computing. Computing is only interesting in the sense that it does something with data. It is used for collecting data, it's used for analyzing data, it's used for representing data. And so data is at the heart of what any computer scientist does. It also, in its current stage, raises numerous ethical, social, legal, and related issues. These have to do with datafication. I'm going to say a few words about that in a minute. And the point I'm trying to make here is that you need to think about what you do with the data. So in your group project, I'm pretty sure there will be data that you use for whatever purpose your company has. So this may be for training models, it may be for analyzing user patterns, it may be whatever it is. I'm pretty sure there will be data. I'd be very surprised if your group project doesn't involve data intimately. So you need to think about what you do with the data. You need to think about data governance. You need to think about the value of data, and you also need to think about how you make sure that data is representative, represents the diversity of people involved in your projects, to make sure that people are properly engaged and represented. So datafication is a concept that's been around for a while, and the idea is that in current usage, a lot of human activities which previously did not have anything to do with data, or at least not in the way that we think about it, now create data, leave a digital trail. So pretty much whatever you do, whether you take your bus and pay with your credit card, whether you do anything with your bank account, pay money, get money, whether you do research, whether you read something, your geolocation, all of these things now create data. That's the datafication. So there's more and more and more data out there that we generate, sometimes voluntarily and often without even being aware of it. That means that you need to think about data governance. So what is it that the data represents? How is it collected? Who has access to it? What purpose is it used for? This is, of course, specifically important for personal data, especially then special category data, but it's also potentially important for non-personal data. So you need to think about what happens to the data in the long term. And that means you need to think about many different aspects of data. You need to think about security, about standards, about existing policies, about what is used for which technology, what is the quality, how do you ensure its quality. And in most cases, it'll be very difficult for any one individual to answer all these questions. So there is this idea that you need to engage with the stakeholders, the people who own the data or who are the data subjects, but also who are the subject experts in various aspects of data governance, from security to technical storage, you name it. So responsible data governance has to keep all these things in mind and ensure that data is used appropriately. Data is increasingly treated as a commodity, so it's something you can buy and sell. It's an idea that we're now perfectly used to, even though maybe 30 years ago it wouldn't have been as obvious. that you can simply sell your own data and that you get something in return for that. This fact that you can use data as a commodity that you can buy and sell, it raises new questions which previously might not have arisen in the same way. So it can lead to breaches of human rights, obviously privacy, which is a human right, which is defined in the European Convention, Article 8. But other human rights may also be affected. Freedom of speech, for example. It can lead to discrimination. That's something that I think we're all very much aware of. So your data can be used in ways that benefit you and can also disadvantage you, for example, through algorithmic biases, where you're treated badly, worse, or better because of some of the characteristics that you have that are non-relevant to the question at hand, such as you are treated differently because of your skin color, with regards to your possibility of reoffending as a former criminal offender. All of these are well-discussed examples, which I'm sure you're aware of. So there are also aspects coming out of this commodification of the data that are less widely discussed. So for example, the question of extracting the value of data through people who are not involved with the actual original data. This is something that we've had in medical ethics as a topic for quite a while. So the extraction of indigenous knowledge for the purpose of creating drugs, which is something that pharma companies did and still do, and which is, I think, a legitimate thing to do for them. However, if they do this in a way that doesn't give back the rewards to the indigenous communities where the knowledge comes from, then it becomes ethically problematic. And the same is true for all sorts of data. The people who benefit from the data, including and primarily financially benefit from the data, are often not the people who put in the data and have the original knowledge. And the people who do have the original knowledge are not the ones who are compensated for that. So all of this is problematic and really decreases users' trust. There have been observations around data creating a new type of class structure, where your access to data and your ownership of data determine where in the societal hierarchy you sit. And at the top of that would be the big tech companies. These are the Googles and Facebooks of this world. They own the platforms that really benefit from data. Underneath them are the corporate partners who benefit from the platforms. So those are people who advertise on Facebook, for example. And at the bottom of the pyramid is the data subjects, all the people who create the data, provide the data. And that includes you as individuals, you as researchers, as small companies. I think there's a lot to be said that this idea of data feudalism is one that captures a core component of how current societies run, and it's something that you want to think about when you develop your report. Now, will your company lead to strengthen, further promote, or weaken data feudalism? So data is important. That's why we're using it. It helps us make better decisions. It helps us solve problems. But at the moment, one could argue, I would argue, that the distribution of benefits and costs of data use and data governance are unevenly distributed. So the question is, how can we do this in a way that is more socially desirable, that is more democratically viable? So that's a question that you need to consider in collaboration with stakeholders, with the people who are involved. And that's one of the key reasons why you need to be inclusive, why you need to make sure that your stakeholder engagement doesn't just cover the usual suspect, not just your normal users, not just the rich, but you need to think about who else is affected and how those stakeholders' voices can be heard in the process of creating and using data for the benefits of society. Now, this is, of course, not just a problem for you as an individual, and indeed, you as an individual will often find it very difficult to do this. This is something that organizations, that society, that groups will have to do. But what is important is that you, as a computer scientist, as a computer professional, understand these challenges and therefore are in a position to address them appropriately. That is one of the things I would hope that we'll see in your reports.